part is like why are they saying it's the cosmic seas?
It's just how it was conceived. It was it's a place of unpredictability, right? You can't live there. And you can't plant crops there. And if you go on it and you get a storm or something like that, then you're probably going to die.
So
it's a place of unpredictability.
So what is the difference between the waters of the death and cosmic seas? Then I guess I'm still kind of confused because they're both like unpredictable, or are they both? Is like one scarier than the other?
Bridge the gaps, make them synonymous, right? So he's talking about waters of death, but it's within their cosmic understanding of the waters and stuff like that, right? So the two really overlap.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm writing notes. Okay, I'll keep going. I'll just reread that part. With the boatman Cherubim, then Gilgamesh crosses the cosmic seas and water of death and meets with Utnapishtim at the mouth of the rivers, a designation not uncommon for the abode of the gods atop the cosmic mount. Next, in the famous tablet XI, Utnapishtim recounts the story of the worldwide deluge. Through the floodwaters, stop saying this guy's name. Utnapishtim's ship comes to a halt upon Mount Nisir. Atop this mount, he then offers worship to the gods. Then I led out all to the four winds and offered a sacrifice. I poured out a libation on the top of the mountain. While the broad geography traversed by Gilgamesh moves from the land to the mountains to the seas, it was precisely Utnapishtim's residing across the Sea of Death that is outside the immediate geography within which waters surround the lands of Mount Mashu. That makes this eschewed pattern necessary. However, being removed to the mouth of the rivers himself, Utnapishtim's epic journey moves through the waters deluge to the mountain for worship. Keel summarizes the movement thus: ziggurat, like step tower, can mean mountaintop. In the Gilgamesh epic, Utnapishtim and ziggurat pours out a libation after the flood. Here, ziggurat is the top of Mountain Nisir, on which Utnapishtim's ark has come to land. Interestingly, the term ziggurat here forms a link between the cosmic mountain ideology of Gilgamesh as literature and the religious cult of the original audiences. Given the inclusion of the primeval waters in the cosmological landscape of ANE cultures and the significant feature of the primal hill arising out of them, it is unremarkable that those waters should be a piece with the cosmic mountain symbolism informing the architecture and mythology of the ANE temples and taken for granted in much of the ANE literature. One might also expect, moreover, that the cultic rituals similarly manifest a cosmic mountain ideology that integrates the cosmic waters. This is precisely what is found, for example, in the New Year ritual of Babylon, the enthronement festival in which the statue of Marduk was led to a sanctuary where his victory would be reenacted by placing the statue on the sea, presumably a podium, after a dramatized battle. Another significant ritual, the river Ordeal, will be considered in a section C below after cursory look at the cosmic waters in ancient Israel.
Yep. So you've got this kind of broad narrative which says that in those texts that you're talking about, that the figure goes through the waters and then they end up on a mountain and then they make an offering, right? So you've got the basic structure there. So if you think about the structure of the story of Noah, right? He's going to go through the waters. He ends up on a mountain, and then he makes an offering. So broadly, you've got this kind of parallel with the biblical flood story to the material that you've just been reading there. And so again, it's just drawing these parallels to the ancient Near Eastern material and saying, look, there's a pattern here that you would follow in the ancient Near East, and you go through the waters and you end up on a mountain, and that mountain is where you meet the divine.
Okay. So what is with the ancient Near Eastern thing? Like, why are there so many similarities? Yeah. Like, why are they kind of the same? Like, is there a reason for that? Or are they just saying, like, hey, this is cool? Or are they trying to, like, prove a point, I guess?
This is their conceptual world view. So this is how they understand the world around them. This is how they explain the world around them. Okay. And sometimes it's explained in different ways in different texts. But sometimes what you'll see is that even though they're different texts, they have the same type of flow of thought. And it's really that core bit that we're looking for. It's not necessarily the details attached to that core bit, but it's actually the core bit and the kind of flow of thinking, right? And so those texts are all pointing to a mountain. And the mountain is where you meet the divine. And how you get there is through the waters, right? And so obviously they're going to have different, they're coming from different cultures. You've got the Babylonian material, you've got the Ugaritic material, etc., etc. And they're going to add different details. They're going to focus on little details that are different. But the main structure that's underneath, they're all kind of flowing in the same direction. And so that's the key there. It's not understanding the little details. It's really understanding what's the core bit of it, the backbone of it, so to speak, the backbone of what the texts are saying. Because that can give you an insight into how you would think in the ancient Near East.
Okay. So it's just kind of like putting them together. Just like, yeah. So, man, my brain is thinking so hard that I can't even put words together, bro. See, like, I know what's in my mind, but I can't speak it. It's like
as long as you understand and you get the core idea, in time you'll develop the language to express what you want to express. But as long as you get the core idea in your head, that's the key.
Yeah, because I feel like I understand what you're saying, but I feel like when I try to add on to it, I'm just repeating exactly what you say. And I'm like, wait, he just said that though, so why would I?
No, this is all part of the learning curve. If you want to repeat yourself like 100 times, do it. I don't mind at all. Because ultimately this is for you. This isn't for, I mean, I've read the material, I've gone through the material, and I know what it's saying. And so this is really about you and your level of understanding and how you express things. And so, it's good to verbalize these things. So don't feel that you can't, if you want to repeat yourself, repeat yourself. What am I going to do? I'm just going to kind of nod my head and say, okay, let's go.
Okay, thank you. That makes me feel better. So even though if it's not like actually proving anything that the Bible is accurate, it's just giving you like a certain way of thinking about it. Giving it like
this is the key, right? Because what you want to do, what the goal should be is, how were these texts read in the ancient Near East? If you was living in the ancient Near East and you picked up a text of the Torah and you were reading the stories, what impact would the worldview of the ancient Near East have in your reading of the text, right? And so basically what you're doing, You're leaving aside your current modern 21st century worldview, and you're saying, I'm gonna leave those assumptions behind me, and I'm going to use the assumptions that you would have in the ancient Near East. And the way that you get to those assumptions is through the ancient Near Eastern material, because the ancient Near Eastern material will give you a key to unlock the worldview of the ancient Near East, and it will show you what they're thinking about, how they reason, what their logic is, what kinds of interpretations that they hold to, what's significant for them when they think about the world around them, right?
Mhm.
And so that's the key. That's how you want to really understand these texts. And this is what this scholar's doing. He's laying out for you, well, here's the ancient material here. We've got it in the Ugaritic, we've got it in the Babylonian, we've got it in other texts. And here's what they're thinking about, and here's what they're saying, and here's what they're concentrating on. So if they're speaking in this particular way and they're concentrating on these particular things, that must mean that this was central to their way of thinking about texts and about the world around them. And so then you would apply those ways of thinking when now you're reading like Genesis and other places, and now you're thinking in terms of how they would think instead of how you would think in 21st century.
Oh, I like that. That makes so much sense. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Moving on.
I told Naz that.
Really? Did you really?
Naz won't admit it, but I don't tell very many people that either.
That's good. Okay. The cosmic waters and ancient Israel. Okay, what is the canon? Because it's like the third word. Canonical, but like, what is the canon? I know that's very common knowledge, but I'd never learned.
Canon is a collection of books. I'm not reading the actual document as you're reading it, so I'm going by what you're saying, and I'm kind of listening to how you're reading the text and so forth like this. So I haven't actually got any documents.
Do you want me to live stream or like share my screen so you can look at it? Would that be easier?
You can do, or I can just simply open up my PDF.
Yeah, I mean, I'm okay. You can do whatever.
But I would have to boot up my Kindle first.
Okay.
So
do you want me to share my screen, or do you want to go get it?
I'll boot up my Kindle because I think that's going to be more practical.
Okay.
Because obviously you've got to read it, and you may be like moving it around and things like that. So I think it'd be more practical if I use my Kindle. And so if you give me a moment, what it's doing is initializing right now, and hopefully it'll boot. So I've just got to find it.
So is the canon like whether it's Christianity or not, it's just like a group of books? Or does it have to be like specifically religious?
For a very basic definition, okay, it's just a collection of books. That's a very basic definition. But I think that within, I don't know how they're using it in the what page are you on?
30.
30. Let me catch up with you. Hang on.
My notes look so organized because I'm highlighting and they're both green, and it's making me really happy. Green highlighter.
Hang on. I was quite far away. Okay, right. So 30.
At B.
Okay, B. Cosmic waters in ancient Israel. In the canonical literature of Israel, yeah? So in this context, canonical will be like your standard collection of books up to Malachi in the Protestant Bible. So from Genesis to Malachi.
Okay. In the canonical literature of Israel, the cosmic waters play a similarly significant role, particularly in the creation deluge and sea crossing narratives. These, however, will be explored in their respective chapters, in addition to serving as a conceptual backdrop for many of the Psalms. Along with the presence of the cosmic mountain idea in the Hebrew Bible, the mounts rising above the primordial waters at creation appear implicit, while Yahweh? Is that just how you pronounce that? Or is there a new way? Yahweh? Sure.
Where are you? Well, Yod He Vav He. I say Yod He Vav He, but you can use any other term, Most High, God, whatever.
I'll just say Yahweh for now because that's easier. But yeah, okay. While Yahweh is portrayed as a sovereign water wielder in narratives of our thesis that is quite outside of the combat myth per se, yet in a mythopoeic manner, the biblical poets utilize the battle imagery to portray him as a divine warrior who has performed great feats in history. Indeed, in what may be the earliest Israelite poetry, the Song of the Sea in Exodus 15, one finds the motif of the battle with the sea, and probably the Mount of Heritage, the fruit of the victory over the sea. Weinfeld notes the idea of overcoming the waters and establishing the holy abode in various enthronement psalms. Psalm 93, in the background of which stands God's overcoming the river's mighty waters, concepts familiar from the Ugaritic myth, speaks of the establishment of the world, and moreover the throne of God, which is established following his enthronement and is mentioned in proximity to the house of the Lord and holy abode. We find therefore in this psalm the three motives, victory and enthronement, creation and temple, connected together, as they are in the Mesopotamian epic. The victory over the mighty waters and the enthronement of God in his sanctuary are found also in Psalm 29. In Psalm 89, too, we find the foundation of the world together with the victory over Rahab, the Teruah, and kingship. You just joined. Hello. While these various psalms already manifest the prevalence of the cosmic waters within the realm of the cult, one also finds the idea in the expected parallels between cosmology, and the temple's cultus, specifically in the architectural features of the Solomonic temple. The bronze sea of Solomon's temple, for example, may represent the quelling of the great deep. S. Kang thus argues, translating whatever that is, as the sea has been restrained. For our purposes, we simply note that based on the cosmological and cosmogonic symbolism found in Israel's literature and common throughout the ancient Near East, one has reason to anticipate the sort of pattern one in fact finds the epic narratives of creation, deluge, and sea crossing through the waters of the mountain for worship, a pattern we dub cultic, inasmuch as it has to do with approaching God, and which thus foreshadows the tabernacle cultus. Under the monarchy, the temple worship of Israel established upon Zion never lost its cosmic mountain significance. As Psalm PS 99.9 makes clear, exalt Yahweh our God, worship at his holy mountain. Not only the temple, but the whole city of Jerusalem could be absorbed into cosmic mount, as the parallelism of Psalm 48, 1-2, or Hebrew 2-3, demonstrates. Great is Yahweh, greatly to be praised in the city of our God, his holy mountain, beautiful in elevation, joy of the whole earth, Mount Zion on the sides of the north / the city of the great king. Toward understanding the significance specifically of through the waters aspect of the cultic pattern, we turn now to consider a widespread A&E ritual, the so-called Judicial River Ordeal. So is the cultic pattern the same as the through the waters thing? Is that what it's called?
Yeah. So cultic is basically like, do you know temple service, right? Do you know what you do in the temple, right? You perform offerings, you do a priestly service. So in scholarly literature, this is called a cult, and it doesn't mean how you would probably use it in the sense of, well, that religion is a cult. It's not being used in that sense. It's being used in the sense of this is what you do, right? They call it the temple cult. It's just the practices that you do when you're in the temple and so forth, like this. And so when they're conceptualizing, like going through the waters, it's now cultic. It's being understood in kind of like a temple kind of way. And so if you notice there, it talked about Rahab. I don't know if you remember it, but it talks about Rahab in Psalms. And so it's talking about at the crossing of the Red Sea or Reed Sea, when this was reimagined in the biblical material, it's twinned with the slaying of a sea monster named Rahab and Leviathan. Okay, and so the basic imagery works like this: Pharaoh represents this sea monster called Rahab. The armies also represent Rahab or Leviathan, and when the armies come to defeat Israel whilst they're in the midst of the sea, the Most High then steps in and he smites Rahab and Leviathan. And so there are texts in like Isaiah and Psalms that talk and link about Rahab and Leviathan to the victory at the sea. And so now if you're reading it like that, it's suddenly a lot more cosmological in its nature. It's not just simply a crossing of the Red Sea now. What it is, it's a defeating of a chaos monster at the same time. So have you got your Bible open by any chance? Have you got like access to it? Can you read out this for me? Can you read Isaiah chapter 51, verse 9 and 10? So Isaiah 51, verse 9 and 10. Can you read that out?
Yeah. Wait, Isaiah 59.
So 51.
Sorry, 51.
9 and 10. 5, 1, 9 and 10.
Okay. Oh my gosh, it's stuck together. 51. Oh, now it isn't. 9 through 10. Okay. Wake up, armor of the Lord, clothe yourself with strength. Wake up as in the days past, as the generations long ago. Wasn't it you who hacked Rahab to pieces, who pierced the sea monster? Wasn't it you who dried up the sea, the waters of the great deep, who made the sea bed into a road for the redeemed to pass over?
Yeah, so there you've got a sea monster called Rahab, right? And the imagery there that is piercing Rahab or hacking, as you said, Rahab. Okay, so so if you notice, this is talking about the drying up of the sea, the waters of the great deep, or set a depths of a sea away that the redeemed to pass, right? So it's thinking in terms of the Exodus. When they're coming out of Egypt, they go into the sea, into the Reed or Red Sea, but when it's being retold in the context of Rahab, right? And so now you've got this kind of monster chaos, this chaos monster imagery now into the picture. And this happens in other places as well, by the way. This happens in, you'll see it also in Psalms. You'll see it also elsewhere in Isaiah as well, on top of that, where the crossing of the Red Sea is reimagined in terms of these chaos monsters coming to destroy his people, but then the Most High steps in and you've got this battle scene and he slays the sea monster and he's victorious, right? And so this is what you've been reading in this particular chapter. It's how the deity is seen as victorious when they have power over the waters, right? And you've got these tanim, and the tanim is the Hebrew word for the sea monsters. And you first meet the tanim in the creation account in Genesis chapter 1. So when the Most High creates the fish, he also creates the tanim. And this is variously translated. Some translations will say whales, some say great sea monsters. But the idea there is, in Genesis chapter 1, you've got this word tanim. And this tanim later on is associated with monsters like Rahab and Leviathan. And so basically it's creation type language that you're seeing. And so now this creation language is being applied to the Red Sea account. And so what you'll see in places like Psalms is that when Rahab and Leviathan are spoken of, it suddenly breaks out into creation language. and it will give you terminology that will bring to mind the creation account of Genesis chapter 1. And so basically what's happening there is that when the Most High steps in and defeats Leviathan and Rahab, it's tying it together with the idea of creation. So now redemption and creation are being tied together. And so now the victory that you see at the crossing of the Red Sea is cosmic. That means it's got creation language associated with it. And so it's more than just simply a victory, but it's being spoken of in terms of creation, like new creation. So creation and redemption are fusing together when he steps in and delivers his people. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Except one part, I had a question. So for, why would they have that creation language for like the monsters? Like, what was the point of creating those monsters?
Okay, this is a good question. So in the ancient Near East, you'll have things in the Babylonian material and Ugaritic material that have the equivalent of the Tanim. Okay, so you'll have in the Babylonian and Ugaritic material things like Leviathan or the twisting serpent that's seen as being defeated, right? And in those texts, you've got like the figure Baal. He defeats Leviathan. Okay, and so when Isaiah is speaking, he's utilizing that imagery. He's using that imagery to reimagine the crossing of the Red Sea. And when you get to the idea of Tiamat or the Leviathan as it's described in the ancient Near Eastern material, what you'll see in those cultures is that they associated that monster with creation. Okay. So, yeah. So there's a battle, there's a fight at the beginning of creation, and one god defeats the sea monster. And out of that sea monster, then all of creation is made. And so basically you've got this battle context and it's associating it with now all of creation. And so when you know that association, when you apply that to the crossing of the Red Sea, you can see now why the psalmist, for instance, in like Psalms 89 and also in Psalm 74, when he's talking about the defeat of Rahab and Leviathan, he's associating it with creation language. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Sorry, frantically writing. So it's just kind of like another way to bring about it and understand it.
Yeah. So again, we're tapping into their worldview, right? How do they understand the world around them? They understand that the cultures around Israel understood creation in terms of this defeat of this sea monster, that one God defeated that sea monster, and out of that sea monster all of creation was made. And so you're tying together the ideas of creation to this sea monster. Okay,
so it was like a way so that's how they understood it, was through thinking like this.
Yeah, can we go to another text? Can we go to Psalms? And I'll show you how this is all tied together, like with creation. So can you go to Psalms 74, 7-4, 13? Yeah, can you read verse 13 to verse 17, including verse 17, so 13 to 17.
Okay. You divided the sea with your strength. You smashed the heads of the sea monsters in the water. You crushed the heads of Leviathan. You fed him to the creatures of the desert. You opened up springs and streams. You dried up ever-flowing rivers. The day is yours, also the night. You established the moon and the sun. You set all the boundaries of the earth. You made summer and winter.
Okay, so there you've got the defeat of a Tanim, a sea monster called Leviathan. And you see how, again, it's tied together with the idea of the crossing of the Red Sea, right? It's you who divided the fountain and the torrent, you who dried up mighty rivers, right? So it's referencing the crossing of the Red Sea. But then if you notice it breaks out into creation language, right? Why would it suddenly break out into creation language, right? You've just got this smiting of this Leviathan, and then suddenly it breaks out into creation language. Well, if you knew in the ancient Near East that this Leviathan figure was associated with the creation accounts, that type of association now makes complete sense as to why suddenly you're switching to creation language, because there was this natural association in the ancient Near East between the two. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Dang, wait, so Leviathan, I thought that was like some demon or something. That's a sea monster?
Yes, that's a sea monster.
Oh!
In the ancient Near Eastern material, it says it's got 7 heads, right? And even if you notice, if you read verse 13 again, it says you burst the heads, plural, of sea monsters. Notice it says sea monsters, plural. Okay.
Oh,
yeah.
So he's more than one monster because he has more than one head?
Well, remember you got Rahab as well, right? Rahab is a different Tanim, and you got Leviathan, and that's a different Tanim. So you got 2 different sea monsters. So one's called Rahab, and one's called Leviathan.
So it's talking about both in verse 13?
Yes, because it's not singular; it's in the plural for monsters, and so it's talking about more than one monster that the Most High is defeated.
Okay. Is Leviathan also in Revelation? Because I remember reading about that the other day.
It's Leviathan is not explicitly stated in Revelation. I personally believe that it is in there, but it's not explicitly stated.
Yeah. Because didn't it say something about 7 heads?
Yeah, in the ancient Near Eastern material, Leviathan has 7 heads.
Okay.
So would that be kind of... I remember years ago watching the Hercules cartoon movie. Is that a connection to that one dragon that has multiple heads then? Do you know?
I wouldn't know the reference to what you watched. I would only know like the ancient Near Eastern material. I wouldn't know like contemporary depictions.
That was the
Gotcha.
that was the Hydra, where you cut off a head, and 2 heads grow back.
Oh, the 3-headed monster?
Yeah, but if you
maybe that's
every time
what
you
it
cut
is.
off its head, 2 heads grow back in the place that you cut off.
Oh, that's terrifying.
So that with the Leviathan or the dragons or whatever, the beasts in Revelation, would you say there's a very real connection to a creation, or not necessarily creation, but there's real connection to Genesis and the creation story there too? Or what are your thoughts and connection points with that, Naz?
Yeah, this is going outside of the scope of the book, and
okay.
So very, very briefly, I would argue that the 3 Tanim or 3 chaos monsters that we have in the scriptures, because there's actually another one which we haven't gone through. It's called Behemoth. So we've got Leviathan, Rahab, and Behemoth. I would argue that all of those 3 are in the Revelation account. And so Revelation is employing chaos monster imagery. And the function of that is Genesis chapter 1, Adam was to radar. Radar means to tread down. And he's meant to have authority over the birds of the heavens, the beasts of the field, and over the fish of the sea. So that's spatial. So up above, the ground, the sea. So this is very spatial. And if you notice where the beasts come from in Revelation, right? The dragon that you see in Revelation chapter 12, he comes from the great height, so that he comes from the air. You've got the beast that rises up out of the sea, so you've got a sea one there, and then you've got a beast that rises up from the earth. So you've got the earth, the waters, and the sky or the heavens. And so when the Messiah comes back, he defeats all 3. And so basically what he's doing, he's performing the function that Adam had in Genesis chapter 1, where he's about to radar, tread down the birds of the heavens, the beasts of the field, and the fish of the sea. So he's demonstrating Adamic authority at that point.
Interesting.
So when Jesus comes back and defeats those so-called monsters or whatever, that's more of a creative language thing? Why would they tie that, or why would they say that?
Again, this goes outside of the scope of the book.
Yeah.
Um, so when you're reading the biblical material, getting your head around these chaos monster imagery is very, very important, because when you get to places like the book of Daniel employs chaos monster imagery, and Revelation picks up on the imagery of Daniel. Okay, and so if you don't know enough about the chaos imagery that's employed in the scriptures, then you're not going to be best placed for your understanding in Revelation. And so here's the key. In the biblical material, it's perfectly permissible to use chaos monster imagery to talk about history. Okay, so you're employing these imageries, but you're telling a story at the same time, whether that's future prophecy or whether that extends to the past, right? So this is bi-directional. So what I mean by that is these chaos monsters are being associated with the crossing of the Red Sea, so that's in the past. But these chaos monsters are also being associated with what's to come in the future. And you can see that, for instance, in the book of Daniel. When he envisages, like when he thinks about the coming kingdoms, he associates the kingdoms with these chaos monsters. Okay. And so again, he's telling history in the context of chaos monster imagery. And so if you understood a bit more about how in the ancient Near East, you've got these very common conceptions about these chaos monsters, you would be better placed when you're trying to understand what Daniel is saying and what Revelation is saying and so forth like this. But that's a more of a different topic, if you know what I mean.
Where in Daniel can you, sorry, just really quick, where in Daniel can you like read about that? Because I want to look that up.
Sure. If you just sort of beasts in Daniel.
Basically.
Off the top of my head, it's I think, is it Daniel 7? Yeah, Daniel 7. You'd have to read like the entire chapter, but what you'll see is beast imagery.
Cool.
Naz, question.
Uh-huh.
All right, so I need to gather my thoughts. How do I say this? So Paul talks about the idea of we fight not against flesh and blood, but against rulers, dominions, principalities, and unseen places. Mm-hmm. Would you say like the three creatures, like the Leviathan, the blah blah blah, the Rahab, the behemoth, whatever it is, are spiritual entities like demons or fallen angels, or whatever it may be, and that. So like if you like Egypt as an example, the people thought that the king was a god or a demigod, and so like God, Yahweh is known to place those in authority there, and that, and as for like the Gentile nations where it is, the gods will empower or somehow give, I don't know, some type of authority to the leader there. So going back to like you're talking about the different nations and Daniel and how the different chaos figures. So my question is, I guess, is do you think these creatures like the behemoth, the Leviathan, the Rahab, whatever it is, are actual spiritual entities, or is it just imagery of chaos?
Okay, so if you go to Isaiah chapter 30, verse 7, I've just posted it in a parashah discussion in the channel. Okay. So if you go to there, because this translation here will actually render what the Hebrew is saying more literally than some other translations. And so here, Egypt is called Rahab. So in that very text, Egypt is being conceptualized as a sea monster. Also, you'll have text like Ezekiel chapter 29. In Ezekiel chapter 29, it talks about Pharaoh, and it specifically links Pharaoh with this Tanim imagery, this sea monster imagery. Okay, so you've got it. You've got it in the text of Isaiah, and you've got it in the text of Ezekiel chapter 29. So obviously, like Pharaoh wasn't like a spiritual entity, but he's got this Tanim imagery that's associated with him. So it's not necessarily one way in the sense of this type of language, like Tanim language, it only applies to like spiritual entities. It can, but it also can apply to very human figures or even whole countries, right? Because right there in Isaiah 30, chapter 30, verse 7, the entire country is called Rahab. But you know what Rahab is, because within Isaiah, like Isaiah 51, as we've already read out, you get, again, this kind of chaos monster imagery of Rahab being smitten at the crossing of the Red Sea. So it would depend on the context of where we are exactly. So I don't know if that helps answer your question.
Yeah, I think it helps make distinguishing factors. If obviously I don't have all the text in front of me, and so I can't be best make I guess a distinction factor with that. But I think that gives a good principle at play, though.
Yeah, my advice to you is to read all of the texts that deal with Leviathan and Rahab and Behemoth.
Mm-hmm.
Where are all those texts?
Well, they're in a multitude of different places.
Like the Bible.
Oh, right. No, of course. Yeah.
Well, you have to just type in their name. That's all you have to really do. So, for instance, you'll see them in Job. You'll see them in Psalms. You'll see them in the text of Isaiah. Okay, so those are three locations where you'll see Rahab and Leviathan and Behemoth.
Okay. Wow, that's so cool. I didn't know that there was like... I don't know. I'm learning. This is cool, dude. Well, okay. Is there any more questions, or should I continue reading? Okay, I will continue reading. Are we at sea, I think? Yeah, probably.
Yes.
We're at ocean.
Okay. Wait. Okay. Anyways, C, the Judicial River Ordeal. In his study, The River Ordeal in Israelite Literature, McCarter argues that the widespread Mesopotamian phenomenon of trial by river ordeal, judging in legal cases by a primary function of ID, the divine river, constitutes a conceptual backdrop by which certain biblical passages may be better understood. Taking the second law of Hammurabi's code, what's that?
So the code of Hammurabi, it's basically like a law code, okay? And so this law code was in existence either just before or contemporary with the writing of the Torah, okay? And so what some scholarship do is they draw parallels between the code that we see in Hammurabi to the Torah, because sometimes there are very, very close parallels to the kind of legal rulings that you see in the Hammurabi code to what the Torah is saying. And so again, this attests to common ideas in the ancient Near East about justice and things like this.
Okay, cool. Taking the second law of Hammurabi's code as exemplary of the basic process, an accused person would cast himself into the river, that is, into the hands of the divine judge, who would then render the verdict as follows. If the river has then overpowered him, his accuser shall take over the estate. If the river has shown that Sinur to be innocent and he has accordingly come forth safe, the one who brought the charge of sorcery against him shall be put to death, while the one who threw himself into the river shall take over the state of the accuser. Emergence from the waters thus signified innocence, while being overpowered by them, signifying the divine verdict of guilt. Ordeals then were judicial in nature, establishing legal truth, supernatural justice rendered by deity, and universal, widespread throughout the ancient Near East. In the supposition that the paradigm, may indeed serve as a framework in which to better understand the creation, deluge, and sea crossing narratives, we will now review the judicial ordeal in the ancient Near East and its suggested conceptual application in biblical literature. To begin, the significant role of cosmology or cosmic geography should be underscored once more for its ideological power, its influence upon the basic A&E institutions and rituals. In fact, the close correlation in the ancient Near East between the cosmic mountain and the waters may lie behind the variant translation of the Akkadian word, whatever that says, given as mountain area and the place of the river Ordeal. From the connection of the cosmic mountain and the world encircling river where the dead were judged, Herson in Akkadian came to denote the place of the river Ordeal, writes Pope, so that Herson becomes virtually identified with the infernal river, and the river Ordeal ritual itself a symbol of the real Herson of the Last Judgment. Similarly, the organic term Herson encompasses both of the
Ugaritic.
This is so hard. Okay. Encompasses both the mountainous and the watery features of El's abode, making the usual formula. Are you kidding? How am I supposed to pronounce NHR? NHR.
Keep going.
Oh my gosh. And THM unnecessary. Another river Ordeal is understood as cosmic, a river at the edge of the world that leads to the world below. McCarter further explains the revelation of the cosmic river to the cosmic mountain with its application in biblical psalms. In the cosmology of Mesopotamian myth, the term Hersanu referred at once to mountainous regions in the river Ordeal. Mythologically, the Hersanu functions as the place of judgment and interrogation at the entry of the underworld, in its cosmic aspect of the mountain and its place from which judgment is pronounced. At least this is true at Ugariot, where the cosmic mountain of El is also referred to by the borrowed term Hersanu. The connection between the two meanings Hersanu is thus an obvious one insofar as the river Ordeal is understood to take place at the foot of the mountain, the source of the waters and entrance to the underworld. Understood against this background, the imagery of the Psalms in question becomes clear. The threat of death is associated with the raging cosmic waters, which in Israel are understood to be under Yahweh's control. The appeal of the victim is thus to Yahweh as judge. As might be expected in the Israelite adaptation of this cosmology, there is no question of the rivers functioning independently. It is Yahweh who is responsible for the deliverance from the waters. Along this line, Neil compares the Babylonian map of the world with the geographical awareness of the Psalms and observes. Okay, well, I'll just pause there because that's probably getting to the next point. But summary, please.
Okay, so here he's talking about the cosmic significance of the waters and how it's connected to, like, for instance, places like the underground, the underworld. Okay, so you really got to think in terms of how did they view the world around them in the ancient Near East when they like looked down, for instance. What was down there? You know what's up there, but what's down there? And so you got these ideas of the waters of death, and they lead to like the underworld, and the underworld is like the place of the dead, right? And so basically the waters have cosmic significance, right? It's like just use poor language, but like a doorway to the underworld, right? And so basically when it's talking about like cosmic significance, it means basically what is it attached to? What's down there that in the ancient world that they're connecting these things with? And so because it's associated with the idea of the underworld, and when people are pronounced guilty, then they go through this water ordeal where they are placed into the water, and if they survive, then that means, well, the gods are saying that they're innocent. But then if they die, they're saying, well, the gods are saying that they were guilty, and that's why they died, right? So basically the waters now have cosmic significance, whether that means on the judicial side, whether that means it's associated with the underground, the underworld, etc., right? So So this is like a window in how an ancient Near Eastern person would think. And this is the type of beliefs that the ancient Israelites are coming into contact with, right? And so basically now that when the ancient Israelites are looking upon the waters, these surrounding cultures are saying, well, this is the place where you go and you do judicial things, where you're judged and things like this, and it also leads to the underworld and so forth like this. And what you're going to see with the biblical material is it kind of reorientates that belief, just how it reorientates beliefs about like Rahab and Leviathan being slain at creation and things like this. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Is this kind of where? Yeah, I used to learn about this or in school. Didn't people used to do that for like witchcraft and like throw them in like a barrel and like die?
Ironically, it was the other way around, right? Right, because if the thinking was that if you chucked the witch into the water and she drowned, she was innocent. But if she floated, she would be guilty. But this is like the opposite direction to what the ancient Near Eastern material would say, right? Because in the ancient world, what they would say is, well, if you floated and you survived, well, then you're not guilty. But if you drowned, then you are guilty. So it's a complete opposite to what the ancient world would have believed.
That's so sad. You just drown. They're like, oh well, that sucks, I guess.
Hearing that, it sounds like there's very real parallels then when it comes to like the book of Jonah and how Jonah was thrown into the waters and then God brought him out of it. So like showing that he's vindicated in a sense. But Jonah goes to the people. Wow. So like the people then would have understanding that this person is innocent and that he was saved by the gods or whatever. So that's really interesting to me, honestly. Because even in Jonah in chapter 2, he talks about like he reached the base of the mountains and stuff like that. And it's just like, oh wow, that's just, seeing it in hindsight, it's like, wow, there is a lot of real imagery of like the mountains and day of death and chaos and being the depths of the waters. It's crazy.
Yeah, you'll see this type of language employed in Psalms as well, right? Where when David is talking about his troubles, he uses this water language. He goes through these waters and then he comes out vindicated, and so you'll see it employed in Psalms as well. But and so basically, what this scholar is going to do, he's going to just detail. Well, this is the ancient Near Eastern material. And this was the worldview, and this is what the scriptures are building off of, that conceptual worldview.
So, was Jonah, since he survived, seen as innocent? Is that kind of what it's portraying?
Yeah, I mean, you could certainly infer that. I mean, off the top of my head, I can't, but it would be a logical thing to infer from it. You do have this kind of narrative of going through the water and then being justified and things like that. But once you read it that way, it suddenly puts a whole another kind of turn on coming through the Red Sea, right? Because now they're being vindicated as well.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting. Wow. Okay. Cool.
So if I throw my kids in the ocean, if they're being naughty, if they float, it means that they didn't commit the crime.
Oh gosh.
I mean, yes.
Sink or swim.
I would recommend that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to like keep you forever. Like, I could read literally all day, but if you ever need to like leave, just let me know.
Sure.
Because otherwise, I'm literally just gonna keep reading forever and over. So.
Well, here's the thing, right? I'm here for you, so this isn't for me. This is for you. So if you need to, go through this.
Oh my gosh, my heart. Okay. Okay. That's so precious. Okay, carrying on then. Along this line, Keel compares the Babylonian map of the world with the geographical awareness of the Psalms and observes the experimental horizon may have been operative in Psalms, right? Is that what that is? Yeah. Yes.
I don't know where you are. Hang on a minute.
Oh,
I've
page
lost.
34.
Page 30. Oh, that's why I'm on the wrong page. Okay, where are you now?
It says along this line, Keel.
Oh, sorry, I know where you are. There we go.
Yeah. What does PS mean? Psalms?
That's short for Psalms.
Okay. Psalms 139, 8 through 10, which celebrates the omnipresence of God. If I ascend to heaven, thou art there. If I make my bed in Sheol, thou art there. If I take the wings of the morning or dawn and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there thy hand shall lead me, and thy right hand shall hold me. As in Amos 9, 2 through 3, which cites in the same order heaven and Sheol and top of Carmel, and the bottom of the sea, we have here two cosmographical concepts, heaven and the world of the dead, followed by two predominantly geographical concepts, the locus of dawn and the remotest part of the sea. The conceptual pairs in Psalms 139, 8 through 10, and Amos 9, 2 through 3 may be taken as designations of above, heaven, dawn, top of Carmel, and below, bottom of the sea, uttermost part of the sea, Sheol. Psalms 68:22. The same is true in Psalms 107:3, where we find the conceptual pairs rising Saphon and setting sea without any text critical justification. The more recent commentators amend Yam or sea to Yamin, south, but if Saphon is understood as mountaintop and Yam as paraphrase of below, then we have in Psalms 107.3 a statement parallel to Amos 9, 2 through 3, and Psalms 139, 8 through 10. Okay, which is heaven, mountaintop, and Sheol, south. Interesting. Given the cosmological framework of the ordeal, then the wicked, those declared guilty by the divine judge, are consigned to the watery abode of the dead. The cosmic waters of Canaanite cosmology, for instance, not only have their confluence at the mountain of El, but they are also located at the entrance of the watery abode of Mad, or death. Similarly, the Elurguru, having access to the netherworld, Mount of Hell, may indicate guilt or innocence by bringing the accused down or not to the netherworld. Jonah 2:7 may be cited as an explicit biblical parallel. As the roots of the mountains, I descended to the underworld. Its gates were behind me forever. Sheol lies at the roots of the mountain world, thus the subterranean waters through which one must pass in the descent of Sheol are identified with the hostile waters of chaos. The victory over menacing death comes from Yahweh, who triumphs over the waters. Similarly, Cross writes, the cosmic river springing up from the underworld is also Judge River. Tapit Nahar, as in Mesopotamia, the place of the river Ordeal, the place of questioning or judgment as one enters the underworld, whence the term soul. Yep, what in the world?
Sheol.
Okay.
The grave underworld.
Okay. Albright, to be sure, had already proposed the etymology of Sheol as the place where judgments are made, or chambers of fates. This etymology, as Cross convincingly argues, is favorable in light of the Akkadian?
Yep, Akkadian.
Use of the same root, salu, for judicial inquiry, hauling to judgment, and significantly precisely in connection with the river Ordeal. In Job 31:23, Job calls the river of Ordeal the Ed or El, which, consistent with the Psalms, is where the location of the waters of judgment is at its sources of the sea. In the root of the mountains, Jonah 2:7, in short of the foot of the mountain of El or Yahweh. The river Ordeal thus constitutes a judgment through which the righteous are granted access in the refuge of the cosmic mountain, while the wicked are consigned to the underworld. Thus, while an Afro-Babylonian river ordeals does not appear to have been practiced by Israel, one can again affirm its function of the conceptual backdrop, and also note that there are some references to ordeals by water in the Hebrew canon. Yahweh's control over the waters, furthermore, includes his ability to rescue souls from Sheol, the pit, under the waters, McCarter lists Psalms 18, 2 Samuel 22, 66, 69, 88, 124, 144, and the Psalm in Jonah 2 as examples which clearly presuppose a situation of judgment by water, where the threat of death is expressed in terms of raging waters, that is, of cosmic waters, each passage containing most of the following elements. 1. The psalmist is beset by raging waters. 2. He is surrounded by accusers, confronted by enemies. 3. He protests his innocence and reliance upon God, beseeching him for deliverance from the waters. 4. He is drawn out of the water and set in a safe place. For the justified individual vindicated through their ordeal, the process may have had something of a purifying aspect, at least in a sense of cleansing the person from the shame of accusation. The Babylonian Marduk, for example, claimed to be the god who makes a judgment in the river ordeal, purifying, convicting the good and the evil. The Sumerian text Temple Hymn 21 reads, Uraku, within you, or your core, is the river ordeal, which indicates the just man. It should also be noted that Ilagr house may be associated with the washing of ritual purification, as Levitical regulations may also be tied to cosmic waters of creation and the deluge. More to the point, the river ordeal follows a basic pattern of going through the waters to the mountain that will be considered to the creation deluge and sea crossing narratives in the following chapters. Far from being a novel interpretation, Klein had already offered such a reading of the deluge in 1965 article Oath and Ordeal Signs. Archetype of water ordeals was a Noahic deluge. The main features of the subsequent divine river trials were all found in the judgment of the flood. The direct revelation of divine verdict, the use of water as the ordeal element, the overpowering of the condemned, and the deliverance of the justified, and the entrance of the ark-saved heirs of the New World into possession of the erstwhile estates of the ungodly. Our study, however, seeks to interrogate this aspect into the overall pattern of approaching the divine presence. Thus, it is the righteous or innocent alone who are consequently granted access in the sacred mount. The next section on our gate liturgy will explore the approach subsequent to water ordeal.
Okay. So again, it's just pointing out, parallel text like you've got in like Psalms 18, right?
Yeah.
In Psalms 18, like David describes his trials in the context of going through water. And obviously like Jonah's been pointed out there as well, and other places and things like this. And so basically, again, it's tapping into the conceptual worldview of the ancient Near East, right? And now you're placing these texts within the context of dialoguing with these concepts, right? So you have this kind of view in the ancient Near East where you have this trial by water. The waters are connected to the underground, to the underworld. And so the biblical material is picking up on those notions and associating the seas with areas of death, and also judicial matters as well. And so when, like, for instance, Jonah gets swallowed up by the great fish, he associates the sea and the depths to the place of the underworld and death and so forth like this. But this is well attested in the ancient Near Eastern material, right? And so sometimes you have these kind of crossovers in the language because you're dealing with Semitic languages. And because you got crossover in languages, you got very similar terminology. And I don't know if you noticed, but when you was reading out the material, you was using the term El, right? So what you'll see is you'll see El, like for instance, in the Canaanite material. So El is actually a title for the Most High in the Scriptures. And so the reason why it's employing the term El is again because you got crossover of languages. They're Semitic languages. And so there's going to be some kind of crossover at certain points. And so they're going to use the same kind of terminology. And another example of it is like the usage of yam for sea, right? In Hebrew, yam is the word for sea. But in the ancient Near Eastern material, it also employs this term yam when it's talking about the sea. And so you've got these kind of crossover links that are going on. So it's actually within the language it's not just simply conceptual ideas, it's actually crossover ideas that even extend into the language itself. And so you really got to place these texts within the context of ancient Near Eastern societies, but they have a very they've got a very distinct view of the world around them, right? They've got these conceptual world views of, well, the seas are associated with the underground, that the mountains are associated with the divine. If you want judicial judgment, then we'll chuck them in the water, right? So it's cosmic elements. It's detailing their view of the cosmos and their understanding of how the different parts connect together and what they're connected to. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Do they use the words, like those creative language? Like, was that already in the Bible, and that's why the scholars kind of bringing it in, or is there? Well, no, I guess that. Yeah, I guess it would be.
Well, because the biblical material at certain points there will be crossovers, like with ways of expression of things. Okay, because when it comes to religious ideas, there's only so many ways you can express a religious idea. Okay, and so within that, if you keep that in mind, when you're looking at the different cultures, of course there's going to be overlap in concepts, because there's only so many different ways that you can express a religious idea. You're going to have overlap at some point. And in the biblical material, sometimes things are expressed in a way that is very similar or sometimes the same as you would see with the ancient Near Eastern material. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so again, it's more kind of integrated with the surrounding cultures. Remember, it's polemical, it's in dialogue, it's not written in a bubble. The ancient Israelites knew what the surrounding cultures around them believed. Okay, and so they're dialoguing, they're kind of like interacting, but they're using crossover concepts, and so they're plugging into the worldview, right? And that's the key. They're plugging into that worldview, and then they're doing, they're subverting it, and they're reorientating it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I get the how there's overlap and stuff, and maybe it's just because I don't know enough yet. But why is there only a minimal ways to express the religious idea?
Because it can only come out in so many different forms, right? You know how many different ways can you say that the Most High is great, right?
Sure, yeah.
You're going to use crossover concepts no matter what religion or no matter what God you serve, right? You're going to, especially when the language is also similar, right? Because remember, you're dealing with Semitic languages, and the Semitic languages are going to be very similar to each other. And so when you're describing the greatness of a deity, ultimately you're going to have some kind of crossover at some point, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Because it's within the language.
Yeah, for sure. Sorry, I'm writing this down. There's people really loud in my hallway, so if you hear screaming, it's just because it's girls. I'm just gonna be like. Okay. Well, they're still gonna be loud, but I finished writing, which means part 3. Okay. Is that language?
So anyway, you may like the next section. It's to do with gate liturgy.
It's to do with what?
Gate liturgy. So do you know what liturgy is? It's basically like formal service. What you say, what you do. There's entire liturgy that you do.
Okay, cool. I'm excited. Okay. In Israel, protecting the sacred space of the temple may be entailed a great liturgy Well, as found in Psalm 15, which begins with the question emphatically repeated, Yahweh, who may abide in your tabernacle, who may dwell in your holy mountain? A similar question is asked in Psalm 24 and in Isaiah 33. Who shall ascend into the mount of Yahweh, or who shall stand in his holy place? Psalm 24:3. Who among us shall dwell with the consuming fire? Who among us shall dwell with everlasting burnings? The answer provided in Psalm 15, perhaps recited by the priest guarding the temple precincts, is whoever's walk is blameless, whoever works righteousness, whoever speaks truth in his heart, such one may ascend the mount of Yahweh's abode. With particular ambiguities of the cultic ritual, if it indeed took place at all, are not of immediate consequence. An issue for our purpose is simply that the cosmic mountain ideology served as a paradigm or conceptual backdrop for Israel's cultists, so that approaching Yahweh and worship at the temple was comprehended beyond the inevitable metronym. Given the temple's locale atop the hill of Zion, via narrative liturgy, a methopoeic journey to the cosmic mountain of God. As the archetypal temple, the cosmic mountain also has gates barring entrance along the pathway of ascent to the divine abode, so that a ritual gate or entrance liturgy becomes an anticipated possibility in narratives informed by cosmic mountain ideology, while the possibility that the question, who shall ascend the mount of Yahweh, runs like a undercurrent through the narratives of our thesis, will be explored in the following chapters with reference to the creation deluge and sea-crossing narratives, respectively. Here we will briefly survey the concept of the gate liturgy in relation to the temple cultus of Israel, including general A&E parallels in the underlying cosmic mountain ideology informing it. Fundamentally, the gate liturgy has to do with stipulations for who may enter the sacred space of a temple. Somewhat similar to the entrance liturgies in biblical literature are the inscriptions engraved on side doors leading into the temples of Greco-Roman Egypt, such as found at the temple of Edfu, which reads, do not initiate wrongfully, do not enter when unclean, do not utter falsehood in his house, do not covet the property of his temple, do not tell lies, do not receive bribes, do not discriminate between a poor man and a great, do not add to the weight or the measuring cord, but rather reduce them, do not tamper with the corn measure. Griffiths compares another such inscription, which contrasts the one who speaks falsehood in the house with the one who is pure, who is upright, and walks in the path of righteousness, with the constraining paths of Psalm 1. But further, he also notes that the scholarly comparison between the Egyptian inscriptions with the attestations of innocence found in the Book of the Dead, 125, a portion of which reads, Hail to you, great God, Lord of justice. I have come to you, my Lord, that you may bring me so that I may see your beauty, for I know you and I know your name. I have not done falsehood against men. I have not impoverished my associates. I have done no wrong in the place of truth. I have not learnt that which is not. I have done no evil. I have not daily made labor in excess of what was due to be done for me. My name has not reached the offices of those who control slaves. I have not deprived the orphan of his property. I have not done what the gods detest. I have not calumniated a servant his master. I have not caused pain. I have not made hungry. I have not made to weep. I have not killed. I have not commanded to kill. I have not made suffering. I am pure, 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 pure. The comparison illustrates once more that the cultic correspondence between temple liturgy and narrative, one's temple service of Horus, in this case, parallels the soul's journey upon death, both contexts informed by the doorways or gates. Spell 125 of the Book of the Dead reads, All you doorkeepers who guard your portals, who swallow souls, and who gulp down the corpses of the dead who pass by you when they are allotted to the house of destruction. May you guide, N. May you open the portals for him. May the earth open its caverns to him. May you make him triumphant over the enemies. In one sense, of course, the concern for who may enter sacred space is already imitated by the presence of doors. What is the Book of the Dead, even? I've never heard of that.
That's what Joseph Smith translated into the Book of Abraham.
Hi, welcome back.
Okay,
What's up?
so the Book of the Dead is the Egyptian material. So obviously, like, you got the biblical material, and so you got the stories like the Exodus, and obviously that was in the context of Egypt, and so like the Egyptian material is going to also impact your reading of like the biblical material, because again, you're dealing with ancient Near Eastern culture and custom and understanding and conceptual worldview. So, you know, these types of texts also impact your reading.
Naz,
Mm-hmm.
didn't you know the Book of the Dead is actually the Book of Abraham? According to Joseph Smith.
There we go.
His translational skills were phenomenal, by the way.
Apparently.
In one sense, of course, the concern. By the way, Yellow, we're on page 40. If you would like to follow along.
Not at all.
Okay, never
I've
mind.
already read this.
Okay. In one sense, of course, the concern for who may enter sacred space is already imitated by the presence of doors. Wait, did I read this? There were many reasons why temple doors were considered so important. They represented the entrance of the holy place, and the gate was so often used in pictures as a symbol for the temple itself. The door, therefore, was a symbol for a central point in religion, the meeting between God and man. The doors or gates of a temple, then, are necessitated by, and thus signifiers of, the holiness of the space. Sacredness is one of the main characteristics of temple space identified by Lundquist, and ultimately derives, as Krause points out, from the divine presence. Oh, that's not English. Whoa. Yeah, stuff. Okay. Protecting the divine abode from profanation was the function common throughout the ancient Near East of the temple door guardians, eventually performed by priests. One such Sumerian guardian, Ig Alam, whose name means the divine door of the bison, had the primary function, as described in Judea's Cylinder, to admit the righteous, to keep away the wrongdoer. Much like Sedu and Lamassu, who guarded entry to temples, then Ig-Alama's function was to decide who should be admitted to the temple, i.e. to the god. An additional way of protecting sacred space of profanation in the ancient Near East was via the ritual lustrations by which the worshipper could wash his hands in innocence. The emplacement of guardian genii and lustration sprinklings thus appear to be the two principal means of protecting sacred space in the ancient Near East, the ritual of the latter protecting from the threat of the former. In Assyria, for example, priests would ladle holy water using bronze situl and sprinkle those who dared pass the guardian demons. Whoa. Turning now to the general cosmic mountain ideology underlying the A&E temples, two features delineated by Anderson are especially relevant. One, the mountain is a refuge place of protection from the powers of chaos, namely the primeval waters, and two, it is especially sacred. We should mention the holiness of the cosmic mountain. Those who would ascend in heights must be righteous. Psalms 15:24 through 6. Given the assumed Methopoeic cosmology surviving the river ordeal is considered in the previous section, may perhaps be seen as pre-adequate for the extent of worship. While the wicked are judged via the waters are consigned to Sheol, the righteous are brought safely through the waters to the mount of the divine presence. Thus, ablutions / lustrations may be the cultic counterpart of the Methopoeic idea of the river ordeal, while the statues and a priest stationed at the gateway of temples represent the mythic creatures guarding the mount. In the literature of ancient Israel, there indeed seems to be the connection between the entrance liturgy at the gate of the temple, or cosmic mountain, at the idea of the river ordeal. Surviving the ordeal is related to having clean hands before Yahweh, who controls the many waters and has founded his throne upon them, as a consideration of several psalms will seem to justify.
Do you want to stop there for a moment? Do you want to?
Yeah.
Okay, so obviously you got the concentration there of like the Psalms, for instance, like Psalms 15 and 24, right? So when it's talking about who shall ascend the mountain, right? It's associating with sacred space. So again, within the text themselves, it's associating the temple or the tabernacle to the mountain itself. And so now when you think in terms of going to the temple, you have to think in terms of going up a mountain, okay? Because now the mountains are the place where you meet the divine. And so when you ascend up the mountain, you've got this whole kind of liturgy that you go through. And so there in like Psalms 15 and 24, you can see who shall ascend up, right? And then it gives a list of what the kind of qualities that you would need for, proper ascent to come into the sacred space. And so basically you would need to have innocent hands and so forth like this. And so you got this idea of innocency, right? But you've just come through it. If you're looking at this in the context of like coming out of Egypt, right? They go through the sea, and then they're going to meet at the most high mountain. And so they're coming up to the mountain, but they've already been through the sea and they've already been justified. So they've been justified. Now they're coming up to the mountain, and the mountain is the place where they're going to meet the divine. And so that basic pattern that you see there is going to be mimicked when it comes to the tabernacle / temple, because the temple is associated with the mountain. And what you'll see is kind of like immersions, like they're mikvah. They go through waters and then they come into sacred space when you go into the temple. And so basically, again, it's mimicking this idea of like justification, and you have innocent hands, and then you can ascend up to the mount or send up to the temple / tabernacle. So again, it's just mimicking what we're seeing, and also with the comparable ancient Near Eastern material, where you got the kind of the flow of through the waters up the mountain, and then that's where you meet the divine, and that's basically what's being said there.
So I just want to make sure I get this right. I might be wrong, but it's like going through the waters, trying to show that like because you made it back out, you're now innocent, so now you can ascend?
Yeah.
Does that tie together with baptisms?
You could argue in that direction. You get the idea of like justification and things like this. And so there is probably a wider narrative there that you could apply to conceptions of like immersion. So, but that's like a different topic, but you're thinking in the right direction, I think.
Okay, sweet. 1 second. Okay. Psalm 24, likely a pre-exilic witness to Yahweh as creator, asks who may ascend to the mount of Yahweh, or who may stand in his holy place. This hill, Mount Zion, is central over the earth that was founded upon the seas and established upon the waters. And being the chosen abode of Yahweh, only the one who has clean hands and a pure heart, who has not lifted up his soul to an idol, may ascend. Thus the psalm, as Microcosm noted, contains laws of sanctuary that serve as qualifications for temple entry, for approaching the divine presence in the temple. Indeed, he posited the sanctuary.
Yeah.
Okay, the sanctuary gate as a primary setting for Decalogue law. Focus then shifts to the approaching presence, the gates, the everlasting doors, and the righteous king's victories entrance. Gate is used of the tabernacle entrance, the gates of the Jerusalem temple, and Bethel, where the gate of heaven is in parallel with the house of God, with reference here in Psalm 24 being to Yahweh's holy mount as the archetypal temple. The cosmic mountain has gates. Returning to the qualifications, righteousness is thus a cult ethic. The platform of God's throne in Zion is righteousness and justice. Therefore, the one who would approach must be righteous. Interesting, the throne of Egypt during the Ramesside period is known to take the symbolic form met the hieroglyphic symbol for righteousness that is the same time a representation of the primeval mound. It may be ventured that the pharaoh of his throne represents the god enthroned over the mount, both the throne and the mount founded upon righteousness. The pharaoh commonly understood as the deity incarnate. This is precisely what Helmut Brunner, who suggested a relationship between Solomon's throne and the mythological archetype of Egypt. Poised.
Yeah, don't worry, that's German. You won't.
Bunch of jibber jabber. How, like, I feel, oh my gosh. Man, it looks like English, but it looks not like English. Gosh. Anyways, moving on. Keel further relates how this mythopoeic understanding informed the gate liturgy, the temple cultus. The abyss is a dimension of chaos and of death, but the high place, the mountain, belongs to the temple. In the Psalms, the location of the temple of Jerusalem, or more precisely Zion, one goes up to Jerusalem, Psalm 122:4, and at the temple gates, one asks who may further ascend the mountain of Yahweh. According to the information provided by the Psalms, the pilgrim addressed the priest or priests sitting at the temple of gates, asking who might set foot on the mountain of Yahweh. The gates of the Jerusalem temple, as gates of righteousness, were open only to the righteous. He who professes fulfillment of the conditions is pronounced righteous and may pass the temple gates confident of receiving blessing from Yahweh. In Psalm 18, an immense and splendid panorama of Israelite. Panorama? Okay.
Panorama.
What is that?
It's like a panorama. It's a kaleidoscope of different things.
Okay, like a little collection or something of Israelite cosmology. The psalmist recounts how Yahweh's deliverance, in which the channels of the sea were seen and the foundations of the world were uncovered, was wrought because the psalmist had clean hands. The psalmist's innocence is also described with the key terms "my righteousness," synonymously paralleled with "clean hands," and "blameless," the precise qualifications for approaching Yahweh's holy mount as delineated in Psalm 15. This deliverance from the cords of Sheol, in which God drew the psalmist out of many waters, moreover leads to the praise and thankful worship. Surviving the watery ordeal then has to do with having clean hands, so that washing one's hands in innocence, whether by cultic lustration or otherwise, seems to carry symbolism of going through the waters. The priests, to be sure, were commanded to wash their hands and feet via the bronze laver subdued waters, before approaching either the tabernacle or the altar, cosmic mount, upon pain or death, for they shall wash with water lest they die. Rip. Thus the suggestion that the bronze laver probably presented the primeval waters in ritual appears sound.
Okay, I'll just step in here. So when it's talking about the bronze laver in like, for instance, like in the tabernacle / temple, when Solomon builds the temple, he calls the bronze laver that held the water for the priests to wash their hands and feet, he called it the sea. Okay, so that he's associating that imagery with the actual sea. And so in the ancient Near East, like the Israelite tabernacle / temple was associated with the cosmos. It was associated with all of creation. And so different parts of the temple represented different parts of creation. And so when it comes to the bronze laver, that represented the sea. And so, the text, the biblical material points this out very clearly. That when you're thinking about bronze laver, you associate that with the sea. So it's pointing you directly to like a direct connection to a part of creation. But this also happens with the other parts of the tabernacle / temple, where different parts of the tabernacle / temple represent different parts of creation. And so that's what the author's getting at there. When he says subdue waters, what that author knows is that the temple was associated with all of creation, and so different parts represented different parts of creation. But there we go.
So was that, since it's associated with the sea, does that kind of bring in where it's not that like it proves whether you're innocent or guilty, but it's more of a place to show that you're innocent or like to be cleaned?
Yeah, like, I mean, I think that you're thinking in the right direction. I think when it comes to the waters, you've got the idea of that basically in the biblical material, the Most High tames the waters, he rebukes the waters. And so he has control over the waters. He's seen as sitting enthroned over the waters of Noah, for instance. And so what some scholarship may say is when it comes to the bronze laver, what it demonstrates is how the seas have been overcome. They've been suppressed. They're fully in control now. They're not chaos. So it demonstrates again superiority over the seas and authority, etc., etc. But you are thinking in the right direction.
Yay! I'm learning, bro. This is so interesting.
I have a question.
Sure.
So like in the new, bringing that concept over like into the New Testament. So like when the disciples and Jesus are on the boat and there's the great storm and Jesus is sleeping. Jesus wakes up and he rebukes the water or the storm basically, and it ceases. So would you say that's portrayal of Jesus having authority and power over like chaos and death and destruction?
So when it comes to the temple tabernacle, that was represented by different parts of that represented different parts of creation. However, this also happens with the high priest. The high priest, his garments represent different parts of creation. Mm-hmm. And so you've got this idea of the high priest is intimately connected with all of creation. So he basically has authority over creation. And so, for instance, like when he goes in before the Most High into the Holy of Holies, in the first century, you got writers like Philo, and they're talking about the high priest. And he says that when the high priest goes into the Holy of Holies, he doesn't just represent the nation, he represents the entire cosmos. He represents all of creation. And so he brings all of creation in with him when he intercedes. And so his intercession isn't just for simply the nation, it's all for all creation. Josephus says basically the same thing. Josephus, when he's talking about the high priest and the tabernacle, he says, if you look upon the material that they wear and the fabric and things like this, it's quite evident that they represent the entire universe. And so basically, you got much more. How you view the world around you is therefore much more. It's got more cosmic significance. That has cosmic significance because it's associated with the underworld and judgment and things like this. But you've got to apply these types of concepts to the temple and the high priest, because it's the same principle. And so now you've got a much more kind of a richer understanding of the function of the high priest and the temple stroke tabernacle, because basically that acts as a restored, renewed creation. And this is why, like Genesis 1 is structured in a 7-day structure, because 7 in the ancient world was associated with house or temple building. So for instance, you'll go to the Baal epic, and when he constructs his house, he constructs it in 7 days. And so if you're reading Genesis 1 in the ancient Near East and you read the structure of 7 days, 6 plus 1, you'll think, the Most High is creating a temple or a tabernacle when he's creating creation itself. So all of creation now is being associated with the idea of temple and tabernacle and house. And so that imagery was also being associated to the tabernacle.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
So
I see that better. Yeah.
So when you construct a tabernacle or a temple, you're really constructing a microcosm of all creation. So this is the restored, renewed creation that Most High is establishing. And this is the place where you meet now the divine on the mountain.
So would you say both the temple and the priests is a microcosm of creation?
Yes.
Or
okay. The sources say this. The sources say this. You could the Jewish sources just flat out say this.
Okay. I just want to make sure I understand that paradigm correctly.
What's a microcosm?
A microcosm. A microcosm is a small working model, or a small model, basically. So the temple was like a small model of all creation, and but a micro, a smaller form.
Okay. Cool. In the same vein, Psalm 26 offers the pattern of illustration before approaching the divine presence in the temple. I will wash my hands in innocence, so I will go about your altar, O Yahweh. Yahweh, I have loved your habitation of your house and the place where your glory dwells. Around the center, the psalmist conveys the idea of his feet not slipping. Amidst Yahweh's testing, his vindication contrasted by the judgment of sinners, in whose hands is a sinister scheme and whose right hand is full of bribes. In Psalm 118, the psalmist's deliverance from death leads to bold proclamation. Open to me the gates of righteousness. I will go through them. I will praise Yahweh. This is the gate of Yahweh through which the righteous will enter. Here, as with Psalm 15 and 24, the temple gates, according to their title, serve not only to forbid entrance to the unrighteous, but to bolster the confidence of the righteous to enter into the divine presence. Thus, Psalm 118 explicitly connects gate entry with righteousness. This psalm, too, starts outside the temple gate and reflects the entry through the gate of righteousness. This is probably the name of the actual gate, very likely the innermost temple gate, through which only the righteous, the congregation, and the state worthy of the cult are allowed to enter. The very fact that the congregation was allowed to enter through the gate of righteousness was at the time a corroboration of its righteousness and an imparting of the power of righteousness and happiness. So since God views everyone as sinners, how are there certain people that are allowed to enter?
Well, so do you mean like the priesthood, basically, like the Levites, right? So the Levites were chosen out either because of the sin of the golden calf or in the wilderness. There's debate around about how the Torah should be read there, but basically the Levites were taken in place of the firstborn. Let's track with that reasoning for the moment. And so basically, what does the tabernacle represent? What is it trying to say? Well, the tabernacle is the restored, renewed creation where it's basically a new Eden, and you see this Eden imagery with the cherubim, for instance. You get the cherubim imagery with the Ark of the Covenant, and later in Solomon's temple, you see cherubim imagery like at the entrance of the temple as well, or at least into the Holy of Holies, at least. And so basically, when you think of temple, think Eden, because just as Eden was on a mountain, according to Ezekiel, that in Ezekiel chapter 28, it has a parallel between the garden of the Most High to Eden, to a mountain. Okay, so in the text of Ezekiel, it's more explicit. It's implicit in Genesis chapter 3 or chapter 2, sorry. And so basically, when you think of temple, think Eden, and as we've seen in other texts, the temple is on a mountain, so it's on a high place, just like how Eden was considered to be on a mountain. So basically, you're recreating Eden, and within that, you've got your new Adam. And so the priesthood really is meant to constitute that new Adam, right? And that's really summed up with Aaron being the high priest. And so what some of the Jewish sources say when they're talking about the high priest is they associate the high priest with Adam. And so now you've got your Adam in your new creation, in your new Eden. Okay. And so this is why not everyone was allowed in. It's because this is the picture that the Most High wants to present to mankind. This is the place where you come to get right. This is the place where you come to get justified. But here's a picture of what I intend to have with all of mankind. It's this kind of intimate relationship that you had in Eden, but I'm replicating that relationship in the temple stroke tabernacle. And so within that picture, the Most High doesn't want that picture to be marred or kind of for sin to enter into the picture and mess up the picture. And so this is why you've got this also distinction between the Levites and the non-Levites. And so when you ascend up, when you go up to the temple, there's certain things that you have to do, like, for instance, be immersed before you go into sacred space and things like this. And so again, it just fits into the narrative of now you're going to be justified, and then you're going to come into sacred space. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So who was the high priest then?
So you got various high priests. So basically it begins with Aaron, okay, and then basically as it stood, according to the Torah, the high priest was meant to officiate for life, okay, until he died. Okay, when he died, it passed on to the next one, and then when he died, it passed on to the next one. When you get into the Second Temple period, it gets a bit more complex. And the priesthood in certain parts of the Second Temple period didn't officiate for life. The priesthood was the garments of the high priest were sold to the highest bidder because the Romans were there, and so things were a bit different there. And if I remember correctly, when Josephus is talking about the high priests, he identifies that there had been 83 high priests since the time of Aaron. And so 83, yeah, 83. So you've got a very wide range of selection of different high priests throughout the hundreds and hundreds of years that the two temples stood, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Are we on page 49? Did I finish that little section, I think? Okay, I think I did. Beyond a liturgical temple temple entrance formula, biblical literature also contains examples of divine punishment upon human hybrids by ascent that appear to be of piece with the gate liturgy that is informed by similar cosmic mountain ideology. The first two references prophetic oracles entail ascending not simply mountains in general, but the mountain of God, and the third likely involves an attempted ascent into divine abode via ziggurat construction. In the Isaiah oracle, the king of Babylon, who aspires to be enthroned upon God's mountain, says, "I will ascend to heaven. I will also sit on the mount of assembly on the farthest sides of Zaphon," but it is rather in poetic justice brought down to Sheol, the farthest sides. Similarly, in Ezekiel's oracle, the king of Tyre set upon the holy mountain of God. Also described as Eden, the garden of God, is a profane thing to cast out from the mountain of God because he was filled with the violence and sinned. Some have noted how the king's creation is portrayed in Adamic and priestly terms, as in his judgment being turned to ashes by defiling your sanctuaries. An image suggestive of expelled primal human as an excommunicated priest. In Levi 21:23, the blemished priest is denied approaching the altar lest he profane your Yahweh's sanctuaries. As Khan's summary, Summary. Implies the imagery of ascent to or abiding upon the sacred mount. That is, the imagery of the gate liturgy serves as the basis for the lament. The attempts of foreign kings to scale the mythological mountain of God meet with disastrous results. Similarly, foreign kings cannot ascend Zion, Yahweh's chosen mountain. Only the descent of David reigns in Zion. Foreign kings flee in fright. Finally, in the Tower of Babel narrative, the hybrids of building what is likely intended to be understood as a ziggurat by which to ascend into heaven, for its head or top is in the heavens, ends with the judgment and exile scattering over the face of the earth. These three narratives involving a cast down out of the mount of God, or a ziggurat presumably replicitating it because of a sin, are at least suggestive for seeking such cosmic mountain ideology, and particularly the gate liturgy aspects, with its focus on the question of who may ascend in other narratives involving mountains. These expulsions further echo the primal expulsion of Genesis 3 as something of a gate liturgy in reverse. God's judgment, then, is portrayed in Scripture within a liturgical or cultic context. To conclude, cosmic mountain ideology appears to include movement across archetypal geography, namely that of going through the waters of the mountain, whereupon some sort of gate liturgy takes place. That is where the question of who may ascend or enter is answered. As it happens, one finds the general pattern of thought in Tablet IX of Gilgamesh already considered upon the hero upon arrival as the cosmic Mount Mashu is immediately confronted by guardians, part scorpion, part human, precisely the sort of creatures typical of a guardian statues in place before temples, barring entrance through the gates of the mount, while too many lines are missing to discern whether or not they were any leges sacrae involved, and this is not necessarily to be expected. It is, however, one attempting to posit, okay. Some sort of entrance liturgy in the fragmented lines. I want to learn your ... I want to learn, or even constituting the whole conversation itself at the gate. And two, of interest that the hero's crossing of treacherous rivers is mentioned by the scorpion beings at just this point. What is the scorpion beings? Because it keeps bringing that up, but it's kind of confusing.
Yeah. So do you know the cherubim, right? Do you know the cherubim are placed, for instance, at the entrance of the Garden of Eden? Mm-hmm. And then you got the imagery of the cherubim in the temple when it comes to, the cherubim on the ark. So you got these these guardian figures in the biblical material, and so what's being noted here is that in the other ancient Near Eastern material, when you come into the idea of sacred space, you've got this guarding that takes place, and it's in parallel to the cherubim. And so basically here you've got these scorpion beings, and basically those scorpion beings would be in parallel to the cherubim, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, that does make a lot more sense. Okay. The end of their conversation resolves in Gilgamesh's bold declaration. Now open the gate, and the guardians acquiescence with blessing to allow him through the gate of the mountain. Here we have then a narrative historicizing the mythopoeic drama of a Sumerian cosmic mountain ideology. It would be surprising given the established lexical and thematic parallels between them, and to be explored in the following chapters. If the particular cosmic mountain ideology informing Israel's cultists were not evident in the narratives preceding those that recount the establishment of the tabernacle cultus. Indeed, our point is that the narratives, the creation deluge, and the sea crossing narratives in particular serve to explain that the need for and logic of that cultus. We hope to show further that the great question of the Israelite cultus expressed in Psalms 54 as a gate liturgy, namely, who shall ascend the mount of Yahweh, runs as an undercurrent through the same narratives as an integral aspect of the cosmic mountain ideology.
Okay, do you want to leave it there?
Yeah.
Yeah, because we've covered a lot of material over there.
Yeah, I got some thinking to do, and it's almost dinner time. But okay, this is a dumb question.
Sure.
But what is the cosmic, like, what's it called? The cosmic mountain ideology or whatever cosmic.
Sure. Yeah. So if I put that in simple terms for you, so basically it means that when you're thinking about the mountain, you're thinking in terms of how it's associated with the divine. To boil it down to its fundamental idea, that's where you meet the gods or the god, right? In the ancient Near East. And so this is basically what they're saying when they mean cosmic mountain ideology. It means that the mountain is a very significant place in the ancient Near East, and that was perceived as where you meet the god or the gods. And so it's classed as cosmic mountain ideology, and what you're seeing there is employed in the biblical material when it comes to the Most High. You meet the Most High at a mountain, right? And you can see this in various places. You can see this at Sinai. Noah, when the ark rests, it rests on the mountains of Ararat. So again, you're dealing with a mountain. So the ark would have rested on a mountain. The Garden of Eden was understood to be a mountain as per Ezekiel 28. And so that's where you meet the divine. And so again, this idea of, or imagery of the mountain will keep popping up in the biblical material. It'll keep pointing you to aspects of you ascend up, you meet the Most High at a mountain, somewhere high, a mount, a hill, and things like this. And so when you get into the prophets, what you'll see is it's prophesied one day that the temple will be on the highest mountain of the entire earth. And so again, it's pointing you to this cosmic mountain ideology. It's going to be the place where you meet the divine, and it's imaged in such a way that it's saying that it's going to be the highest mountain. It's going to go higher than the other mountains, and so you may meet your deities on those mountains, but that's not the highest point. The highest point is over here, and at that point you've got the temple of the Most High, and that's where you meet the divine. So again, it's tapping into that conceptual worldview in the ancient Near East, and it's and again, it's subverting the idea. You don't need to go after those deities in those mountains. Here's the real mountain, and here's really where you meet the divine.
Okay, so it's just kind of giving you like a bunch of different examples on why people are to believe that like mountains are significant and holy.
Yeah, the fundamental, the most basic way that I can say it is mountains are high places, and so the further up you go, the closer to heaven you get. That's the most basic way I can explain it to you. Okay, and so you'll have texts where the temple is perceived to be on the highest mountain, and so the function of that is to say that is the closest point to heaven that you will ever get. And so basically that's where you meet the divine at that crossover point, at that highest point in the mountain.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Because whenever I like tell my friend about this book, they're like, "Oh, what's it about?" I'm like, mountains. They're like, "Wow, cool book." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm telling you."
Yeah. Once you got it in your head, once you get the concept down, you'll begin to see it more and more in the scriptures. You'll begin to understand why they're talking about mountains like this place and that place, and why they're trying to ascend. Why they're always trying to ascend.
Okay. Yeah. Even just that, like hearing about like the Leviathan and everything, because I was reading about that. I'm like, why is like who is this dude? Like even just reading that brings so much more into it. So I hope that when reading this, how you're saying, like it kind of changes how you read the Bible. Like I'm excited for that.
Yes, it will do, because you're reading it in such a way that you wouldn't casually read these texts in the way that you're reading them now, because you have 21st century assumptions about cosmology, cosmogony, and things like that. And so basically, what you have to do, you have to leave those assumptions behind, and you have to say, okay, I'm going to leave them behind, and I'm going to take on ancient Near Eastern assumptions about worldview, and then I'm going to read the text in that context. But once you do, you'll really appreciate why it's talking about mountains and ascent, and why it's talking about these creatures called Leviathan and Rahab and things like this. And then you'll basically plug into their worldview.
Yeah, okay. I'm so excited for that. I have like a new concept in my mind.
We actually see a lot of that imagery, and we talk a lot about it in the portions as well. So if you're here tomorrow, and
I want to be. I think I was home last weekend.
It's okay. Is Yellow still here? Because he never joins.
No, he should have left.
Darn.
He's gone.
That's sad.
No, don't say that. Is he in a better place?
I guess so. Okay, but thank you so much for reading it through with me, because like it helps so much more.
Yeah.
To actually break it down like that.
Yeah. Hopefully we can catch up again. It's like nearly 12, so I'm a bit tired and I'm a bit drained. So
yeah, no, that's okay.
But hopefully we'll catch up again, and hopefully you'll chew on that. Think through it. And then if you've got any additional questions, feel free to ask.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna go get dinner because it's almost 6 for me.